Hey friends, welcome back to the show. Today's episode is sponsored once again by Podcorn. Like many new podcasters, when we launched Locations Unknown, we had no idea if anyone would even listen. Now that we are gaining traction, we had to find sponsors for our show. For that, we use Podcorn. Podcorn is a marketplace that connects podcasters like us to amazing sponsorship opportunities. Podcorn's mission is to give podcasters transparency, creative freedom, and full control over how and when they monetize. If you are ready to start making money on your podcast, then check them out at podcorn.com. That's podcorn.com.
Thousands of people have mysteriously vanished in America's wilderness. Join us as we dive into the deep end of the unexplainable and try to piece together what happened. You are listening to Locations Unknown.
What's up, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Locations Unknown. I'm your co-host, Joe Irado, and with me, as always, is a guy who votes and doesn't take a selfie, Mike Vandebogart.
Thanks, Joe, and thank you again for everyone tuning in to Locations Unknown. Don't have a lot of updates this time. We do have 2 Patreon shout-outs I'd like to get to, and I apologize on this first one. I'm probably going to butcher the name, but Jody Sawalski and Kevin Hammond. So thank you to Jody and Kevin for being our newest patrons. Like Joe and I always say, we every dollar that we get on Patreon helps us produce a better show for everyone listening. So thank you. We've got a lot of new swag on there. We've got some new masks coming in soon, and we've got some winter hats just in time for the cold weather. So check out our Patreon page. We will start launching some Patreon-only podcast episodes, so stay tuned for that as well.
Yeah, and what's funny is I didn't know that we got those new Slack users, and I have to give a special shout out to Kevin Hammond because I play hockey with Kevin, and he didn't even tell me he was doing that.
Yeah, so yeah.
What's up, Kevin?
Thank Kevin in person for me then.
I will. We have a game on Thursday night.
Yeah, it's We've really got a good set of patrons, and we just had a poll on there about kind of the direction of the podcast. So there's going to be a lot more Patreon-only stuff going on there. So the lowest amount you can donate is $1. So if you want to help us out a little bit, head over to Patreon.
Yeah, get that exclusive content.
Yeah.
All right, everybody, let's gear up and get out to explore Locations Unknown. June 9th, 2013. Mitchell Dale Stehling went for a hike in the Mesa Verde National Park in Colorado. Mitchell spent his time at the park with his wife, Deanan, and his parents. Later in the afternoon, Mitchell decided to take a solo hike to the Spruce Tree House ruin, an easy trail less than a quarter of a mile long. This hike should have been of no consequence for Mitchell. However, he was never seen again, which kicked off a multi-year mystery surrounding the disappearance and the eventual recovery of his remains. Join us this week as we explore the disappearance and death of Mitchell Dale Stehling. Mesa Verde National Park is located in Montezuma County, Colorado. It's 371 miles southwest of Denver, which is about a little under 7 hours of a drive by car. It was established in 1906 by Theodore Roosevelt. The park occupies 52,000 plus acres, roughly the same size as Seattle, Washington. The park protects some of the best preserved ancestral Puebloan, geez, I can't get that right, ancestral Puebloan archaeological sites in the United States. Now, this park sees just over 500,000 visitors per year. And for a rough comparison, Mike, the Great Smoky Mountains National Park sees about 12.5 million and 5.97 million visit the Grand Canyon. So not a lot of people go here, but when you look at the pictures, these are like those carved into the side of a cliff houses.
Yeah.
It looks awesome. I didn't even know this place existed, and I go to Colorado all the time.
Yeah, it looks really cool. I've heard of the history behind this park, but I didn't know it was in Mesa Verde Park, and I didn't know the park was so small. So, it's like you said, it's roughly 52,000 acres or 82 square miles. So it's not much bigger than Seattle, and it doesn't get that many visitors a year compared to some of the big prominent parks. But it's definitely on my list now.
Yeah, it looks like a great park to go to if you don't want to run into a bunch of people, but see some cool stuff. So some facts about it. There's more than 5,000 sites, including 600 cliff dwellings. It makes Mesa Verde the largest archaeological preserve in the United States. Mesa Verde is best known for the structures such as Cliff Palace, thought to be the largest cliff dwelling in North America. Descendants of Mesa Verde ancestral Pueblo people spread out far and wide and include the Hopi in Arizona. Mesa Verde became a United Nations educational, scientific, and cultural organization, World Heritage Site in 1978. Mesa Verde was likely deserted by the 1300s, however. No one is quite sure why. Some researchers blame crop failures. So it could have been just climate change at the time was no longer a good site to live and grow and prosper. Mm-hmm. The people of Mesa Verde were farmers who grew beans, corn, and squash. They supplemented their diet by gathering other edible plants, hunting deer, squirrels, rabbits, and other animals. Now, the climate of Mesa Verde National Park has a warm summer with average temps reaching around 85 degrees Fahrenheit in July, and somewhat average winter with average lows in the 20s between November and March. So it's not too harsh in either direction. It's got a temperate climate in both summer and winter. The park averages pretty persistent 1 to 2 inches of precipitation each month the entire year, with the peak in August at 2.25 inches and the low in June with only about a half an inch. We're dealing with a real temperate climate, like not too much rain, not too much heat, doesn't get too cold. So if you're there in, spring, summer, fall months, it's going to be pretty pleasant. No real big predatory animals in the area. We mentioned what the Native American tribes would hunt back then. So there's nothing too dangerous that would be of consequence if you're out backpacking or hiking. The visitors encounter rugged terrain at an elevation of 7,000 to 8,500 feet. Steep cliffs, deep canyons, and narrow trails can be a danger to all visitors. Hiking trails range from easy loops to strenuous hikes up elevation, and exposure can be a concern at the higher elevations or in peak seasons. So, hot summer days that go up higher than normal or very cold winter days. Outside of that, I'd say your basic Colorado weather.
Yeah, exposure is an issue in any park where you're getting up in elevation, so that's not unusual. With such a temperate climate there, I think, it's, unless you're caught in a bad winter storm, you're probably going to be okay.
Sure. And that's pretty much it for the terrain. Mike, let's learn a little bit about Mitchell Dale Stehling.
Yeah, so Mitchell went missing in this park on June 9th, 2013. He was 51 at the time of his disappearance. He had kind of black, grayish hair, if you've seen pictures of him. We actually know quite a bit about what he was wearing. He didn't have any water on him, which a big red flag for me. He did have a cell phone on him, which I always harp on. Every one of these cases, I talk about how you should always take your cell phone with you, even if you don't think you'll have service. He had a khaki Mesa Verde Museum Association baseball cap, a brown t-shirt, tan and khaki shorts, a calf-height white socks, Red Wing Oxford walking boots, and he also had his wallet and some cigarettes on him. So one of the things we like to look at, too, is the weather at the time of the disappearance. So he went missing around a time of the year that the lows would have been in the, the 50s. So I think even in what he was wearing, you could probably survive a night out there. It's not uncommon for people to start developing hypothermia in 50-degree weather, especially if maybe they got real sweaty during the day or they, got wet. So
yeah, if there's a lot of moisture or they are wet or something like that, it can obviously increase the likelihood. But
yeah, but you can survive 50-degree weather at night, but there is a chance that he, could have had an issue with hypothermia. So the only other thing we know about his physical appearance is that he seemed like a pretty fit, 50-year-old man. He was described as an avid outdoorsman. He camped a lot. Now I did make a note of this in my research, Joe, that it was mentioned a lot throughout the different news articles I read that he was an outdoorsman and a camper, but I really didn't see anything about experience in the backcountry. So I think those are two very different things. I think you can be, you love being in the outdoors, you like, car camping or camping with an RV, but it's a much different experience to backcountry hiking.
I 100% agree. There's always like two sides to these national parks. There are I call them the tourist attractions, where you have shorter loops or things that you're going to take a bus to the trailhead. You're going to bring maybe a bottle of water, a fanny pack. You got your brand new stuff on. You never did this stuff before. You're going to be able to hike to this cool thing, take a picture, and you're going to go back to your hotel or your campsite. And then there is the deep backcountry where you are carrying your tent, your gear, your food, and you enter in at a trailhead and you are not coming back for several days. And in a lot of cases, you will be out of contact with human beings. He, from what I gleaned, and not discounting his experience, he seemed more like the type that did the latter of those, or not the latter, the former of those trips, where he did car camping and tent camping mostly.
And I would agree. And, the major red flag for me is not having any water. Even on maybe an hour or two hike, I'm always carrying water with me. Or if I don't have a lot of water, I definitely have a filter if I know I'll be crossing water sources. So
yes. Yeah, it's always water. Water planning is one of the most critical issues that we talk about anytime we plan a route. It's how many days or how many hours till next water source.
Yeah. So that's a major red flag that to me shows that maybe he didn't have the backcountry experience, even though he might have been an avid outdoorsman. So just kind of a little tidbit from Joe and I who, have spent a lot of time hiking in the backcountry. So that's about all we know about his character profile. So I'm going to jump right into the timeline, Joe. So it is June 9th, 2013, about 4:30 p.m. Mitchell tells his wife, Deanan, and his parents he's going to go for a short hike to the Spruce Tree House ruins. This trail is less than a quarter mile long and connects to the Petroglyph Point Trail, a 2.5 mile loop with cliff exposures that takes off from the Spruce Tree Trail. So this sounds like a real easy hike. This is something we'd probably do in a park if we had an hour or two left before we had to get back to camp or, something like that. Something that you wouldn't really, wouldn't be too hard to do quickly.
Yeah, we wouldn't do a lot of planning. It'd be more like, hey, can we get this in? Or are we going to be exhausted? But yeah, I would say, because I'm more conservative when it comes to time estimates, I'd give myself an hour and a half to 2 hours to complete this.
Yeah.
And then maybe extra time if I knew I wanted to sit down and eat lunch there when I got there, or take pictures or wander around and explore.
Yeah, and I believe he went by himself because his parents were not in the condition to go hiking, and I think his wife didn't want to at the time, so that's why he went by himself. I'm never a fan of hiking alone. I think if you can hike with at least one other person or, a group of people is better, but he went out in this short trail alone. So witnesses do claim to have seen him at some point along the trail and actually spoke to him. So we know he left about 4:30. We know at some point after that time he was seen on the trail. So we have, pretty good evidence to say that he actually started this hike, which is not always the case in some of these cases where we think someone might be hiking that trail, but then we have no evidence that they actually made it to the trail. So we know he's in this park and he's started hiking this trail at 4:30. According to the park rangers, they said this hike should have only taken him about an hour. Like we said, the weather around the time of his disappearance was actually pretty hot for this park. It was in the 90 to 100 degree Fahrenheit range. So this does bring up an issue of dehydration, especially if he didn't have any water with him.
That's definitely a red flag.
Yeah, and especially at elevation, you tend to get dehydrated faster. So the terrain that he went missing in ranged between 6,000 and 8,000 feet, and there were steep canyons. So
the canyons to me are a bigger red flag than the altitude in that one.
Yeah, so I think in that kind of temperature, I've hiked in 90 to 100 degree weather. You lose a lot of water fast. You need to have a couple liters on you, to stay hydrated. So just keep that in mind as we go through the timeline. So it is June 9th still at about 6:30 p.m. After not returning for over 2 hours, an extensive SAR operation commenced and lasted for 2 weeks. So pretty remarkable that he had only really been missing for 2 hours and a search and rescue operation kind of kicked off right away. Usually, sometimes you see people, they'll be missing for several days before they're reported missing or weeks. And the quicker you can get people out there looking, the better chance you have of finding the person alive.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, so I think it's really remarkable, and credit to the Park Service in this one for getting a search operation going quickly. So fast forward now to 7 p.m. and phone records indicate that Mitchell tried to access his voicemail, we don't know if he actually was able to access it or not, but this was the last time the cell phone tower was pinged by his phone. So this is really important, and we stress this in a lot of our episodes. Being able to ping the tower will give searchers kind of an idea of where he was, kind of a place to start their search. So we know at 7 p.m. at whatever location he was at, he was still alive. So that's an important fact. And it sounds like there were repeated attempts to call and text him before and after the cell tower was pinged, but they were met with no success. So,
okay, so they didn't connect?
Yeah, they didn't connect or he didn't answer, but they tried to call him repeatedly. So, which is not uncommon when you're out in the park. I mean, you could be walking and just get a cell phone reception for like 10 seconds and then it disappears.
Sure.
Okay. Now, so like we said, the search and rescue operation lasted for about 2 weeks. So that would have gone from June 9th to what we estimate June 23rd. According to the Park Service, at its peak, they had over 60 searchers, 2 dog teams, helicopter surveillance, and rope teams. So this is pretty common in areas that are, a lot of canyons. You'll have rope teams that will, rappel down and check the canyon bottoms looking for in case you fell.
And I think that's a significant number. It's not larger than some of the other cases we've had for sure.
Yeah.
But given the size of the loop, it's a significant number. They had a very good narrowed down area where he could have been.
Yeah, and this isn't a very big park, and like we said earlier, it's got some pretty crazy terrain. So there's not a lot of areas that you could theoretically think he would be. So
Sure.
So you're right. That's a pretty large team for the area that they were searching. One interesting fact that came out of the search was K9 units actually picked up some scent early in the search, the first couple of days, but then they lost it. So it's interesting that they were, they must have been kind of in the right area where he was at one point because the K9 units were picking up smells.
Sure.
So according to Patrick O'Driscoll of the National Park Service's media service, other than the main trails, the majority of Mesa Verde is uncharted territory that is off limits to hikers. So that's not uncommon for a park like this where they have a lot of historical treasures. They don't want you stomping around, damaging anything. So if he had stayed on trail, there's not that many places they could have looked for him.
Mm-hmm.
Jesse Ferris, chief ranger for the Mesa Verde National Park, said the area has been heavily searched with no results. In November, we had a dog team come in and search the area again for human remains, but they did not pick up any hits. When we have search and rescue exercises, we go there and continue to look, but have not found him.
And that's something we see that's very common amongst these parks is they try and do a lot of their search and rescue training in areas where people have been known to go missing and are not found, because every now and then, from what I understand from talking to the PIO of Joshua Tree, they sometimes will find things in training missions years later.
Yeah, and it's not uncommon for remains to get disturbed due to weather and animals, so it's not inconceivable that you searched one area, but then a few months later you may find a bone or an article of clothing that was moved. So yeah, that's very common in the national parks. We've come across this multiple times on other cases. So at the time, the authorities suspected no foul play. People, family and friends, their gut feeling was that he was out there somewhere and never left the park. And a lot of people thought there was no reason to think otherwise, but there had been no sightings. And up until just recently, the case was still open. Chief Ranger Ferris said a photo of Dale and notes about his disappearance remain on his wall. On average, about 5 to 10 people go missing in the park yearly, according to Ferris, but Mitchell sticks with them. Ferris said the park extended efforts for months to find Mitchell, which included calling in close to 100 people at the time of the search, scaling cliffs, and searching in areas of the park that are closed to visitors. So it's a very, like we said, crazy terrain, and the park rangers did acknowledge that there is a very likely chance that he could have fallen down a cliff, and it would be next to impossible for searchers to find him in all those different areas he could fall.
Okay, so that's new, something new I didn't think of. That if they can't physically inspect all of those different crevasses, and it's so easy to fall.
Yeah,
that's like
I've
the
almost
biggest
fallen
thing.
a few times.
It's incredible. Even if you're a great hiker, you got the best shoes, it's still super dangerous. I'm sure you've seen it, Mike, but there's I don't want to call it a great video because of what happened, but a great example video online of a woman who was trying to videotape a waterfall.
Yeah.
And thankfully she survived, but she took one tiny little step to look, slipped, and fell like 50 to 100 feet, bouncing off rocks into the water. And she was filming the whole thing. You could just hear like how much damage the fall had done. Like she was like in pain, like a whimpering animal, like couldn't talk.
Yeah.
And it was a small fall. So if you fall down these cliffs, it can happen in a second. Like most of the time, you're not going to come out of there. You're not even going to be alive.
No, and that's why I've had a couple close encounters in Hawaii. I was hiking on the island of Kauai, and we were on this cliff ledge about 500 feet up from some jagged surf, and I stopped paying attention for just a split second, and my right leg or my right foot came down and kind of half on the trail, half off, and I fell, and luckily I had a hiking pole with me that kind of caught me, but that's how quickly you can fall.
Yeah, and that's like one of the most dangerous hikes in the world, right?
Yeah, it's on Kauai, and there's a 7-mile marker where the trail is about maybe 8 to 9 inches wide.
Jeez.
And and that's why we always stress when you're hiking that you really want to be aware of your surroundings, be very steady with your footing.
I was very close to getting all the royalties of the show.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
That's so bad. All right, go on.
So that is kind of the timeline for the events that led up to his disappearance and kind of what park rangers were saying at the time. Now, of course, we see this in other cases. Family sometimes, has their own opinions on what happened to him, how the Park Service handled the case. And this case was no different. The wife of Mitchell, I think at the time was complaining that the Park Service really didn't do enough to find her husband.
I would say that's not a slight on the Park Service as much as
no.
A
They're
lot
grieving.
of times, exactly. You have family members that are grieving, panicking, distressed. In their eyes, there's quite literally nothing could be done well enough until, their loved one is found. So that's what's hard when dealing with the context of a family member's comments, opinions, but then you also can't write it off either because there is a history sometimes where there is there is malfeasance or
Incompetence.
derelict of duty on trying to on these search and rescue teams.
Yeah, and you got to think too with the National Park Service, the search and rescue operations aren't coordinated from some headquarters in DC. Each national park is kind of its own little world, and they handle their search and rescues. Mesa Verde handles their search and rescue different than Grand Canyon National Park and different than Glacier National Park. I mean, there's definitely standards for running search and rescue operations, but they all kind of still operate independently. So
the terrain's different, the weather's different,
the people are different,
experience is different. Yeah, you almost would have to.
So according to the park, authorities shared case files with the family and kept them informed on the search activity, but Mitchell's wife didn't think the rangers did enough to search for her husband. She said in total, rangers spent 2 days searching for Mitchell before scaling back. And then a news release cited a lack of evidence as to the reason. 1 year after he went missing, she said, "Now that it's been a year, and the more I reflect on it, honestly, I'm just pissed off." Their attitude was, he was there, he was lost, and what are they supposed to do about it? So, I get where she's coming from. When when it's your husband, your child, your wife missing, no expense should be spared. Get an army out there to search. But when you're in the Park Service, they're going to try everything they can to find the person. But if they're not finding any evidence, and like we said, this is a smaller park, I could see the search operation getting scaled back faster than maybe a larger park like Glacier or Yellowstone.
Yeah, if they're covering all the territory, they're covering their grids properly, and they get the majority of the area, and there's no sign of life, no sign of foul play. I mean, the reality is, not in this case, but there are stories of people who purposefully disappear. So how much resources do you spend when you're not finding any signs of anything?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the Park Service actually countered her comments kind of with what you said. They said the park rangers searched for Mitchell for about 3 months, mostly in a scaled-back mode, and continued to keep his disappearance on their radar. Their searches continue to cover a 3 to 5 mile radius around the trail he was last seen on. Mitchell's wife, however, wanted the search to extend out of the small area. Despite her husband's age, she thought he could put on more miles. So right there, you see the park rangers don't think at his age that he's going to be able to cover a lot, more, than a 5 mile radius. But his wife was kind of pissed that they didn't extend the search out farther. Mm-hmm. So, and, unfortunately, this is kind of a common thing we see in these cases. There's always kind of a disagreement between the family and the Park Service. So it's sad, but it's a kind of a fact of these cases.
Sure.
So now fast forward to 2014, Mitchell's wife returned to the park 3 times, expecting answers, expecting to find her husband, expecting some sort of closure, but each time she returned, nothing changed. She believes her husband went off the trail because of confusing signs in the park. Because she was unable to walk the trail, she fed her interest by the account of a family member who had last seen her husband on the trail. So this is an interesting comment. I've been in several parks where the trails are not marked by signs, but sometimes just marked by stacked rocks. Mm-hmm. And if you aren't paying attention, you can literally walk right off the trail.
Very easily.
Yeah. My first hike in Canyonlands, the entire hike was done on trails with, the big rocks stacked in the bottom and then kind of making a little, cone almost of rocks. And they go every, 50 yards, 100 yards. And several times we walked right off the trail because we weren't paying attention. And you can get lost really easily if you're not, familiar with that kind of trail markings.
Absolutely.
So that is believable. Maybe he wasn't experienced, navigating by that kind of trail marker. So
sure.
I've got a little excerpt from a writer/hiker, Jody Peterin. She wrote this in 2013, and she was actually in the park on the same day, on the same trail when he disappeared. So this is just an excerpt of what she wrote. She wrote, "After an hour of walking, I suddenly heard a weary male voice call, 'I need some help.' I thought of the missing hiker. Perhaps after visiting Spruce Tree House, he attempted this trail and run into trouble. I called out several times, but got no response. I thought about going off trail to look, but figured I'd become a victim number 2 if I tried to scramble down those ledges and cliffs. My cell phone had no signal. I hiked back down the trail as fast as I could, and when I found the chief ranger, I told him what I'd heard. Relief washed over his face as another staffer said, "We thought we heard a call for help in that area yesterday." They quickly began planning to bring in dogs and more searchers. I left the ranger station and stood looking at the opposite side of the canyon where I'd heard the call and said a silent prayer. When I got back to my western Colorado home the following day, I checked the news, thinking I'd read that the hiker had been found. Instead, I learned that Mitchell was still missing and now 70 people were looking for him. As I write this, it's been almost 2 weeks since Mitchell vanished, and the search has been scaled down. A group of us still think he's somewhere in the park, said Chief Ranger Jesse Ferris. We've all heard of planned disappearances, but it doesn't smell that way. So that's kind of an interesting little haunting tidbit about this case, that this writer thought she heard him yelling for help. So who knows? Maybe he was stuck on a cliff and was still alive but injured, and was trying to call for help. But just a little tidbit, after he had disappeared.
It was smart of her to not go look for him, honestly. I think some people would think differently, but that is 100% what you're not supposed to do. You're supposed to, if anything, the best thing she could have done is maybe like left something tied to a tree or at next to the trail to mark the exact location. Yeah. But yeah, you never go off wandering looking for where the trouble occurred without, professionals with you.
Yeah. I mean, I guess if you're a professional, you've done a lot of rappelling and you have the gear with you, you could attempt it. But even then, I would say, tie a shirt around a tree and, get back to the park ranger office and let them know. Okay, so fast forward to September 17th, 2020. So just recently, after 7 years, park law enforcement rangers found human remains in the park. Mesa Verde National Park Superintendent Cliff Spencer said an anonymous tip the day before indicated the remains of Dale were in a remote section of the park west of Durango.
And I want to jump in real quick, Mike. Whenever you hear people refer to him Dale or Mitchell, he went by his middle name. And that's where, so when you're seeing quotes from people that say Dale, it's usually people that either knew the family or were friends with him because they refer to him as Dale, but it is the same person. Because that tripped me up a little bit, too, because I was reading, I'm like, Mitchell, who's Dale? Who's this other guy? And it's like, no, they just refer to him by his middle name.
I know, and I apologize to the listeners. I've been probably switching between Mitchell and Dale from time to time, so I apologize for that. I also say this is kind of interesting. Anonymous tip indicated the remains of Mitchell were in a remote section.
So the anonymous tip named him?
Indicated, the remains of Mitchell were in this remote section, which is odd. How would they know?
That's suspect.
Yeah. So the Park Service went on to say the tip did not provide an exact location, but descriptions in the tip gave search crews a good idea of where it was. So I don't know. That's a red flag to me. I think when we get into our theories, I have a theory maybe around that.
Okay. So, don't spoil it now. Let's keep going.
Yeah. So Spencer said the body was found quite a distance away from where Mitchell was last seen, around 4.2 miles. The area, which took crews about 2 hours to reach, was searched in 2013. So it sounds like a pretty rugged area that takes a while to get to, and it was previously searched. So it's very strange. In my theories, I'll get to this too.
Okay.
So Montezuma,
I'm starting to formulate some opinions right now that I'm just going to keep to myself.
Okay. So Montezuma County Coroner George Devers said he is 99% sure the remains are that of Mitchell Dale because items found at the scene, a driver's license, credit cards, and a social security card that Mitchell's information was on. So I'd say it's pretty clear-cut evidence that it was Mitchell. Devers said he is going to meet with the forensic anthropologist to examine the remains, looking for any signs of trauma or any clues that can explain the circumstances surrounding his mysterious death. He also said that as of late September, foul play was not suspected, and it did not appear he was attacked by an animal. But because this is so new, I don't think we know the results yet from the coroner's report. It may not come out for a few more months because it's only November right now.
Okay.
So they go on to say, because the remains were just bones, Devers said it was likely impossible to determine the cause of death unless Mitchell had obvious signs of trauma, which he did not. Just from what I saw, I'd say natural causes, but we'll look everything over. So it appears, Joe, that he didn't have any broken bones, which you would think if he fell off a cliff, good possibility you're going to have, several broken bones.
Yeah, that kind of blows that whole thing out of the water.
Yeah. So interesting fact there. They go on to say that at the time of the discovery, it was unclear whether a DNA test was possible. They go on to explain that DNA from a bone sample, or to take DNA from a bone sample, the bone must have retained some moisture. Many of the bones found at the scene were bleached, but it's impossible. But it's possible there is still some moisture in there. If a DNA test is possible, Devers said it would take about a year to get the results back. So,
wow. Just sitting out in the sun in the elements can...
Just baking up at elevation, probably pretty dry. So, that's interesting. I mean, the bones are 7 years old too, theoretically, supposedly. So he goes on to finally say that Dale's remains were found by a hiker in the area that is closed to the public at the bottom of a canyon and is believed that is where he died. So we originally had, it was an anonymous tip, but now the coroner is saying that it was a hiker that was hiking in a closed area of the park. I just have a lot of...
Okay, so that makes it less suspect to me. If it's somebody that wasn't supposed to be somewhere and they're like, crap, I got to do the right thing, I'm going to do it anonymously. I would argue that maybe taking like the $200 fine and just, going to him and be like, hey, I was where I wasn't supposed to be, but I found a body. Maybe you could waive the fee.
Right. Yeah, I mean, this is a really interesting case, and I just have questions I was thinking about. Maybe you were thinking the same things. The first thing that jumps at me right away is, he was found in an area that was previously searched, an extensive 2-week search, 60 to 100 volunteers, dog teams, helicopters, rope teams. The park is relatively small, though rugged. Was it missed, or were his remains put there after the search had happened? Or did he fall there after the search happened? How did Dale get so lost? From everything we read, this is a really quick, easy trail.
Yeah, it's well marked, heavily traveled.
I mean, if he got lost, I could see maybe he's around the trail a bit, but how did he end up 4.2 miles away from the trail, rugged terrain? I mean, it took searchers 2 hours to get to where his remains were. That means it would have taken some effort to get there.
I think that's key. That's key. If it takes them 2 hours to go 4 miles and they know the area. Yeah. And they're probably in shape, or at least in shape enough to do that because they do it regularly. That's no small feat.
Yeah. So that's another puzzling aspect of this case. What caused his death? So like the coroner said, there were no visible signs on the bones that he suffered traumatic trauma. So there was no broken bones, no skull fractures. So what happened to him? How did he get down to the bottom of this canyon without any injury? He obviously had no gear with him to rappel down there. How does that happen?
Yeah. So it's super gnarly. Mike, no, you tell me your theory first, because I'm kind of just like still organizing my thoughts.
So, I mean, these are maybe theory / what could be a possibility. Okay. I think based on the fact that I don't think he was maybe as experienced in the backcountry as maybe just, an outdoorsman, and he had no water with him. I think dehydration could have played a significant factor in his disappearance. Like we said, it was 90, 100 degrees Fahrenheit out. He's at elevation, no water. He's middle-aged. He's not a younger, fit guy. When you start getting dehydrated, you start making poor decisions. Your judgment's off. He could have gotten dehydrated. Factor in the trails are marked, not marked with signs, but maybe rock markers like what I saw in Canyonlands, maybe he did hike off trail accidentally and just was getting confused and kept hiking the wrong way and, somehow ended up where his remains were found. I think that's one theory. I think foul play might play a factor here. Something happened to him on that.
Why do you think foul play?
I think foul play maybe just because they found him in the bottom of a canyon without any injuries. If they had found his remains down there and he had broken legs and, a skull fracture from the fall, I would think it was clear cut he slipped and fell down the canyon. But the fact that they found his remains really uninjured in an area that had already been searched, that just makes me feel like something happened to him and then his body was dumped there at a later time.
Okay.
I mean, he didn't really have anything on him of value to steal, and they found most of his wallet and everything with his remains. So did he get into some kind of altercation? Did he? I don't know. I'm just saying that because it makes no sense how his body would have gotten down there uninjured.
No, I'm gonna agree with you on that one, because when they started talking about, and just for backstory, I didn't do the full research on this. I knew a little bit about it, but Mike did most of the research in the episode. So when I heard about the canyons not being able to be searched entirely, I was like, okay, this dude definitely fell down somewhere. Mm-hmm. And obviously from the beginning we knew they found the body. I'm like, but I didn't know where they found it. I was going to assume they were going to find it in some crevasse near where the lady was, and you and I would have this very easy, he fell down, got injured enough where he couldn't yell. Maybe he didn't break anything, but, knocked the wind out of him, got a concussion, something like that might not show up in bone issues. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, they were just unable to find him because he wasn't able to call out for help when they initially searched the area, and then there it is, case closed. That's what I thought going in.
Yeah.
It changed my whole perspective because, like you said, two separate, you have that lady who wrote the article.
Yeah.
That basically confirmed that two separate individuals heard a male voice in the same area calling out for help.
Yep.
That is right off of the trail.
Yeah.
So let's assume that he's lost and or injured at that point.
Right off the trail.
Right off the trail, or close enough where you could hear a voice, which is not very far. I mean, if they're screaming, yeah, but she said it was very faint.
Yep.
So that would assume, again, if there's an injury, maybe not a broken bone or dehydration, exposure, something, maybe he's in early onset hypothermia, but after a couple days can't really move.
Yeah.
That makes sense. That makes sense if they find the body there. What doesn't make sense is if he's in a compromised state, close enough to the trail where you can hear him, but then the body is found many years later, 4.5 miles from the site. And it's not like, in the episodes with High Desert where there's flash floods where things can get moved around. This isn't a place like that. It's temperate climate. It's very rocky. Animals aren't going to carry an entire body, especially that far. So the big unknown in this case is, I feel very confidently that he was still by the trail within the search time window, and for whatever reason they couldn't find him.
Yeah.
How did he get 4 miles away from there?
I know. It's potentially injured. If he was calling for help near the trail, you have to assume something was wrong with him. And, but what was wrong with him? Obviously, he didn't have any broken bones. Maybe he hit his head or something. Or maybe he just was suffering from dehydration and was confused and was calling out for help. But any scenario that you can think of where he would call for help, how then is he able to hike 4.5 miles in rugged terrain and end up in the bottom of a canyon? It just doesn't make any sense to me. I have a lot of questions around the person who found his remains. I mean,
yeah, I think it's suspect. And at the same time, I try and put both shoes on, and hiking an area of the park where you're not supposed to be and then having to call in a tip. Mm-hmm. I could argue it's a good person who's doing something a little stupid, but they're good enough that they could have ignored it and been like, I don't want to get in trouble.
Yeah.
So like, you know what? I'm going to call an anonymous tip that I found a body. It's more suspect, though, however, that they anonymously reported the name of the individual. Again, now hold on. This is from the flip-flop quite a bit.
Yeah.
That's suspect that they knew the name. Not suspect if they saw the body and looked at the license, looked at this, like kind of searched it to figure out who it was first.
Maybe they did that.
And that's what I'm saying. But like, to be honest with you, I don't know if I would do that. And not that I
wouldn't
know a
touch
lot
it.
about. Exactly. That's what I'm
Yeah.
saying. I wouldn't touch it. I might take a picture.
Yep.
A, because I wouldn't want to, and B, because just, this isn't science at all, but watching enough crime television episodes, the first thing they do is don't touch anything at the crime scene.
Yeah, exactly.
If I stumbled upon it, I would have tried to not disturb it as much as possible. That's what you're not supposed to do. So
I probably would have done a quick little search of the area to see if there was anything else nearby.
yeah,
And
but I wouldn't have like dug through the personal
No,
belongings.
I would have
at
taken
all.
a bunch of pictures and then hike right back to the ranger station.
Yeah, 100%. So that's where I can see, and this is again, I think that plays into the unknowns about the story, is every aspect of it has something that can go both ways. This person could be a great person who's just off trail, fine, dumb decision, doing the right thing and reporting it, or they're involved somehow.
Yeah.
And then it's very weird of why they would report it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I still have issues with how fast the search operation started. If he was injured and near the trail, you would think they would have found him, and even the dog teams were picking up scent. So, I mean, was he abducted? I don't know. It's a crazy case. I'm hoping that in the next year or two, whenever the investigation's wrapped up, now that they've found his remains, there's an assumption that the case will be closed and we'll be able to get that Park Service report through the a Freedom of Information Act request. So I think we'll learn more maybe once we read that report. But based on all the facts, Joe, I leaning towards foul play somehow. Even though that I don't know.
I'm with you, but like if we had like the scales of justice,
yeah,
and you have like foul play and innocent mistake death, and you have like the toggle at the top that's pointing right in the middle.
Yeah.
Foul play is like one notch over to the right. Like that, like that's like, and that's as far as it goes. I think that's ridiculous to say it that way.
Yeah.
But that's just the reality is I think I'm kind of with you that it seems like there might be some foul play at hand, but there's nothing to prove that. This is pure conjecture. And it's because it's just like a gut feeling that says there's something more to the story that we don't know.
Yeah.
But I can't point to the family, the person who reported it, or the Park Service as to why.
Yeah. None of it makes sense. Hopefully in the next few years, we'll maybe learn more about this case and maybe even do a follow-up if we're made aware of
DNA report back, or
it
get
could
some
turn out to
independent analysis on the bones or something.
I mean, you got to assume they're his remains because all of his stuff was found there, but you really, I don't know, you really don't know until the DNA results come back. It could be a different.
I'm gonna go full Hollywood. What about this? What about? I haven't done this in like a few episodes. I'm gonna spin a story that could be a made for TV movie. What if the anonymous tipster is a murderer?
Yeah.
And was aware of the disappearance or whatever or something.
Mm-hmm.
Managed to. I just ruined my whole thing. Never mind. I'm just thinking. Here's what I'm thinking. They murdered somebody else and planted that stuff on him, but then they would have to have his stuff to begin with.
Yeah.
So it would turn into like some sort of park serial killer.
I mean,
killed both of them, and I don't know.
I mean, you could go full, Dexter Hollywood. Maybe there's a traveling serial killer that murders people in different parks.
Oh my gosh, that's that's what this was. You just pinpointed it, Mike. Why I was even thinking that way. I'm watching through Dexter seasons right now because they're coming out with. They just talked about they're releasing more episodes. So I was like, all right, I got to rewatch it. So now I'm like, okay, it's this great story with like all these character plots and twists. It's like, nah, that doesn't really happen in real life.
Yeah.
I don't know, but I mean, I think you can tell I'm just grasping at straws because I really have no opinion.
Yeah,
don't.
I don't either. I think, normally I would say dehydration, probably number one, dehydration that led to some kind of accident.
Yeah.
But you would assume that accident would have happened close to the trail.
I feel like it's all of it. I feel like he went off trail, then he got lost, then he's exposed to elements, then someone murdered him, and then someone moved the body. Like,
Yeah.
I feel like it's all of it. Like,
Yeah.
that's like all of that makes sense. And that's what's weird about this case. It seems like such a simple, clear-cut case, but there's so many unanswered questions and so many weird gut checks that make you think differently.
Yeah. So that was all I had, Joe. Do you have anything else to add?
Nope. I want to hear from the listeners. I'd say thanks for tuning in the show. We appreciate you all for listening and sharing locations unknown. Go on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter and tell us what you think. This one, I really want everyone's opinion because I think nothing is out of bounds. Even I think I read a comment somewhere about someone thinking that, like, ancient Puebloan myths and things like that. Like, sure, yep, all on the table. Give everything to us.
I was just gonna say we have that episode coming up sometime in the future with that Native American expert. I'll maybe we should ask her about the Native Americans that lived in this area and see what kind of myths and things like that they had. Might be interesting.
I would love to. Yeah, I'd love to know because, like, why did they build the sites there? Was it just because the open cliffs and maybe there's some sort of spiritual aspect to that location, or something that plays into those myths or legends that might shed some light onto what happened here.
Yeah.
So, also, I'll close out with our normal close. Go check out the Patreon. We're gonna start releasing Patreon only episodes. We're gonna do one right after this on a recent missing person who was found, where there's a lot of questions and highly suspect things. So it's not going to follow our normal format. It's going to be very special. The only way to listen to it will be to subscribe to our Patreon account. You can check that out. We have that on Facebook if they need to search it, right? What is it, like Patreon/locations unknown?
You can just type in, go to Google. If you don't want to go to any one of our social media platforms, just type in locations unknown Patreon. It'll be the first link.
Okay, perfect. Do that and sign up. Every level will have access to the shows. But as Mike has stated in many episodes, we'll be sending out swag for different levels and other things that are very level specific.
Everybody who signs up, even at the $1 level, after 3 months, you get a free bumper sticker.
Well, there you go. And as you saw that picture of one of our listeners sent of their Jeep, that accident, they told me it was from, like, not putting it in gear and park or something like that, and it rolled backwards. The only portion of the window that survived was the one where the sticker was. So
there you go.
You get enough of our stickers, you'll save your windows. And so outside of that, we just really appreciate all of you, our loyal listeners, our sponsors that help keep the show going. And remember, when enjoying the beauty of nature, whether backpacking, camping, or taking a walk, to leave no trace. Thanks, and we will see you next time.